Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to Verity La's Unpersoned podcast. I'm Michele Seminara, the co-editor of the journal, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the cancellation of the 2026 Adelaide Writers Week, which is an event which has become a real lightning rod for a lot of questions around free speech, cultural power, who gets to speak, the role of institutions, and the board governance in the arts. So big topic, a very hot topic. Today I've got lovely Joshua Dabblestein joining me. Joshua is a freelance writer based in Sydney, and he's been published in the AFR, the Australian Jewish News, ABC, New Matilda, Sydney Morning Herald, among others. And he has been following this controversy pretty closely and is really well placed to help us unpack what has gone on and what might go on in the future. So thank you for joining us, Joshua.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So for those who've been living under a rock this week in the Australian literary world, which I don't think many of our viewers would be, the Adelaide Writers Festival, the cancellation has been big news, and actually it's broken out beyond just news in the literary world, which is often sort of in its own small little pond. It's gone into the mainstream as well because of the actual broader issues that it brings up and because of the way it's played into commentary around the Bondi tragedy from a few weeks ago. So perhaps we should just say, Adelaide Writers Festival, Adelaide Writers Week is one of the oldest literary festivals in Australia, I think founded in the 1960s. It's a big deal. It's got hundreds of thousands of attendees, contributes millions of dollars to the South Australian economy. And it's not seen just by the artistic director, Louise Adler, but by the Adelaide Festival Board. It's government appointed, and publicly funded, and that's something that plays quite a bit into this story because there's been differences of opinion between the AD, Louise Adler, and the board, and that sort of power tussle has become a central factor in the story. So I think it was the 8th of January, only a week ago, that we first heard, Joshua, about Randa Abdel-Fattah, the Australian Palestinian writers' invitation being rescinded.
Yeah, yeah, it was a week ago. Yesterday or
Mm,
today? Um,
yeah.
I mean, it was very big news for everybody, which is rare.
Mm.
Everybody, by that I mean, depending on which way you interpret politics or whichever form of parochialism you tend to adhere to. Um, but I think, that there were a lot of people very quickly who were quite disturbed by the advent of cancelling a voice, a Palestinian voice at a time where a war in that part of the world has drastically altered the lives of so many people. And I think at face value, it really looked like there was an authority out there that was stifling the free speech of a Palestinian woman in Australia. So I think that's where the outcry came from. I think that that narrative has seen Randa Abdel-Fattah apologise to unreservedly since by the festival, and has seen her reinvited for next year. With that
Mm.
said, there are also a lot of other people out there in the world who have had the dubious luxury of following much of the rhetoric that Abdel Fattah has um, thrown out into the world, especially over the last 2 years. And I think that that there has been a failure to delineate between criticism of Israel, or criticism of a war, or advocacy for Palestinian people, and anti-Zionism, right? And I think it's that lack of delineation or discernment, which has cast the cancelling of Randa Abdel-Fattah as like quite an immoral act. But I think if we were to actually distinguish between those two things, anti-Zionism and criticism of Israel or Palestinian advocacy, we find that these are two very, very different things. And my belief is that Randa Abdel-Fattah's anti-Zionism has resulted in quite a prosperous line of bigotry that has really called her capacity to speak with decorum and integrity into question. And at a public event so soon after the killing of Jews at Bondi Beach, I think that there was a very, very reasonable case to be made that anti-Zionist bigotry uh, is not something that that a public entity should be platforming. But unfortunately, again, because of that lack of discernment between anti-Zionist rhetoric or bigotry and pro-Palestinian advocacy, Randa Abdel-Fattah is cast as somebody who is kind of entering into these debates um, with something helpful, really. And look, I'm sure she probably does in many ways, but that's not really what's being called into question. What's being called into question is some of the incredibly unhelpful ways in which she has entered into this conversation over the last couple of years. So, for example, I mean, we do know that Randa Abdel-Fattah was uh, instrumental in the doxing of 600 Jewish creatives, right? And this is on the public record. Now, not all of these Jewish creatives were Zionists, but labeling a group as Zionists gives somebody carte blanche to dox them, right? And this was actually received with a strange amount of public assent. On top of that, Randa Abdel-Fattah has dehumanized and vilified Zionists for 2 years in so many different ways. And, this is somebody who immediately after October 7, uploaded a graphic of a paratrooper, a Hamas paratrooper, sailing into Israel. Right now, this is the way in which these people, some of them got into Israel to carry out rape, murder, and kidnapped civilians. I think it's a very strange thing that we're able to pass this type of eliminationist extremism off as good faith advocacy. And I think that because of the fact that we have very little literacy in this movement, we lack the capacity to distinguish between anti-Zionist bigotry, really quite harmful and antisocial entries into this conversation with genuine positive contributions.
Yeah. I would agree. I would agree with most of that. Like Rhonda sort of lost me when I did see her, put that first tweet out with the paraglider. I just thought, okay, that's a clear celebration of violence. Okay, it just is. And then, as you say, since then she said quite a lot of other things. And she does direct it towards Zionists, not Jewish people directly, but we can get into the difference between that in a little bit. But she said, for example, that the October 7th invasion of Israel gave her a glimmer of hope, which is also a terrible way to frame something that was so violent and tragic. And she's, there's other quotes that are out there. So the stuff at Sydney Uni was quite problematic, I thought, where she was telling training the kids to sort of chant for the Intifada. There's been quite a lot of stuff. So as you say, she's not exactly a voice of moderation in terms of, okay, let's bring people's awareness to the plight of the Palestinian people, to the suffering, to any solutions that can be made there. Let's bring people together to talk about this. It is very much a sort of an anti-Zionist, anti-Israel rhetoric, on top of being a pro-Palestinian rhetoric. And I don't like that in Australia, people seem to think that you can't have both at the same time, because most of the Jewish people that I talk to who are Zionists in the sense that they just wish to, have a homeland and have the right to a homeland and so forth. They're not the people going around loving the Netanyahu government or every action that they're taking, and they're certainly not, most of them, talking badly about Palestinian people. So I don't understand why we keep platforming in the arts, particularly extremist voices, when there are quite a lot of moderate voices where people are actually working to bring each other together and to actually see each other's point of view, which could be platformed. And I think that's probably my biggest a sort of point of difference with Louise Adler in terms of her platforming of Randa, because yes, definitely have Palestinian Australian voices, or Palestinians from overseas appear, but let's try and, I think we need to have a responsibility to platform and elevate voices that, as you say, are going to make things better, not worse.
Yeah, I mean, look, even the invocation that Randa Abdel-Fattah or any Palestinian or someone of Palestinian heritage
Mm,
should right now be like a voice of moderation. Like I don't know if that's fair, really. I mean, I
mm,
feel given how disturbing so many of the things that have been done to Jews over the last couple of years has been, when you notice that there are, 10 or 12 bright red swastikas tagged up on your local synagogue, it
mm,
doesn't really inspire a feeling of wanting to be a voice of moderation. It inspires a
mm,
feeling of hopelessness and anger,
mm,
and you meet the world where it is. And
mm,
there are tens of thousands of people dead in Gaza,
mm,
right?
mm,
Like to expect someone like Randa Abdel-Fattah or any Palestinian person
mm,
to magically tread this kind of centrist line of moderation, keep everybody happy that would, if I was her, that would really piss me off, right?
mm,
Because ultimately, when your people are being so hurt, how could you not kick and scream? And I think people like Randa Abdel-Fattah, and I think people who are part of any group that is being so hurt have a very natural inclination to do whatever they can, say whatever they can to protect their people,
mm,
to stand up for themselves. I don't call that into question at all. I truly honor it, just as I honor her right to not have to be moderate. But again, I would separate that entirely
mm,
from what it is that anti-Zionism is actually suggesting, right? Now, what we know, and we can't discuss these things without discussing uh, the way of thinking that that is the foundation of all of the rhetoric that we're seeing right now. Now, anti-Zionism is not a critique of Israel, right?
mm,
It's not a response to Israel. Uh, it's not an engagement with Zionism, right? Think about it this way, like, is anti-Semitism a critique of Jews? No.
no.
Was anti-Judaism a critique of the Jewish religion? No. The anti-Judaists conjured up a version of what they believed Judaism to be, right? They
Mm,
imparted it with a bunch of libels, right? They're baby killers, they're detracting from the state, they don't honor our religion, they don't accept Christ, right? How can we trust people? The divine right of kings insists that the ruler of a state is guaranteed by God. And what if you've got a minority who don't trust in that God? How could they obey the law or be trustworthy or reasonable all of a sudden? Accusations of well poisoning, blah, blah, blah. Jews are burnt alive. Okay?
mm, mm,
Actual Judaism doesn't engage, isn't engaged at all by anti-Judaism. It
Yeah.
invents a fake version of it, imparts a bunch of libels, and then construes itself as a natural and moral response, a socially
Mm.
sanctioned, contextually socially appropriate
Mm.
response to a threat. Okay, but of course, 1879, Wilhelm Marr invents the word anti-Semitism. Okay, now, anti-Semites, they're not like anti-Judaists, no, right? They're revolted by this idea that people could be could be discriminated against for their religion, right? This is a post-Enlightenment world. This is a scientific way of thinking. This is about race science. Of course, think about Germany at the time. They're only like a decade or two into the Germanic states having been unified into one collective Germany, right?
Mm.
There's race science, and then there's feelings of like racial impurity, but also social impurity. Let's just consolidate and be German. And what about eugenics, right? The Jews are foreigners, they're enemy aliens, they're considered colonizers, right?
Mm.
In many ways, Nazism is an anti-colonial movement, or it believes itself to be, because it cannot put up with the idea that there might be a foreign alien minority that has
Mm.
equal rights and therefore equal capacity to throw its weight around. So, of course, enter in the libels, right? Jews are race traitors. Jews are controlling the banks, controlling politics. Jews are Bolsheviks, right? You know, look at all those
Yeah.
Russian Jews. They're communists. They're here to corrupt the state ethnically and politically. Okay. And
Mm.
this, just like in anti-Judaism, develops what we call a permission structure. There is a social permission structure garnered to consider the Jew, the ethnic Jew, not the racial Jew. We're not anti-Judaists. This is not about
Mm.
the religion of Judaism. Do not accuse me of that. I find that offensive. But we've got to get honest about the Jewish race and what we're trying to do here, right?
Mm.
You know, it's couched as a moralism, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very, very appetizing. So, of course, what we see, you know, through the early 20th century and into the 30s is the grooming of a people into seeing the Jew not as Jews, but
Mm.
as a construction of Jews, just like we saw Jewish Judaism as a construction of Judaism, right? The enemy is constructed by the perpetrator of the violence using its own vernacular and libels. They
Mm.
take hold, they take root through propaganda and repetition. And
Yeah.
before you know it, the Jew doesn't exist anymore. The neighbor who's a Jew doesn't exist anymore.
Mm.
It's just the idea of the Jew. So of course we
Yes.
have a social license, and of course what happens, right? Anti-Zionism, a
Mm.
new language, a new permission structure.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
West over the last half century, we're ashamed. We're ashamed of the genocides that we've either partaken in or just watched. We're
Mm-hmm.
ashamed of our colonial past. We're ashamed of apartheid. No matter where you are in the West, we're ashamed of segregation. In you know, it's no matter where you are in the West, we know that we need to be atoned, right? And what's there? Well, Zionism is this new state, okay?
Mm.
And all of a sudden, this new language. It's not anti-Judaism. No, it's not about their religion. It's not anti-Semitism. God forbid. Look at the Holocaust. I could never. I have Jewish friends. But come on, Zionism, right?
Mm.
What
Mm.
is Zionism? Does anyone ever define Zionism? And, I mean, we know that there's a very low bar to entry here, which is that you believe in the continued existence of the state. But realistically, considering that the state isn't going anywhere,
Mm.
why does the word Zionism still exist? Why is it still in popular parlance? Why would anybody actually even identify it as a Zionist? Well, I believe
Mm.
largely because anti-Zionism threatens the continued existence of the Jewish state, right? So to reaffirm that it's not going anywhere, right? It's not
Mm.
about criticism, right?
Mm.
Just to reaffirm its license to exist, we use the word Zionist. But anti-Zionism, since Zionism's inception,
Mm.
doesn't at all grapple with what Israel does, but that it is
Yeah.
original sin, just like the original sin of Judaism, the original sin of the Jewish race, and the original sin of the Jewish state is once again imparted with new libels. These are colonialism, apartheid, genocide. These have been
Mm.
repeated originally as Holocaust inversion, right? Early
Mm.
50s, new Israelis having escaped from Europe, barely survived camps by the skin of their teeth, with numbers up their arms, trying to build a state where they can be safe, are all of a sudden being accused of genocide, right?
Mm.
And Holocaust inversion, this is a Soviet propaganda technique. Now, the
Yeah.
USSR supported the creation of Israel in the 1940s. They voted in favor of it at the UN, but within a very short period of time, of course, it turned out that Israel was not going to be a Soviet lapdog in the Middle East, and so they flipped. And ever
Mm.
since then, we've had this barrage of anti-Zionist conspiracy theories and libel that piggyback on what we saw in anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. So the
Mm.
anti-Zionist today is the same libel perpetuating bigot that they were in the 1940s and 1950s. It's somebody who doesn't critically engage with what Israel does. It simply says that you don't have the right to exist regardless. Many of
Mm.
those libels are then retroactively fitted to whatever Israel does. And honestly, I have no intention of having a conversation with anyone about what Israel does because it's not my primary concern, right?
Mm.
First and foremost, my primary concern is that there is a bigotry that denies its existence, and it's the same bigotry that keeps it in a forever war. And that forever war is killing tens of thousands of people, right? It is
Mm.
sharpening the spear of Israel and every government around it into being absolute war machines, right? And they
Mm.
don't have to be. The moment that anti-Zionism, the moment that people like Randa Abdel-Fattah are revealed to not be critically engaging with what's going on,
Mm.
but be simply embroiled in an eliminationist movement that hinges entirely on bigotry. So,
Mm.
as far as I'm concerned, by all definitions I can find, Randa Abdel-Fattah is a bigot. The real question, and I'll finish this answer on this, is how
Mm.
you feel about George Brandis when he said, I think it was 2016, everybody has the right to be a bigot. Now, I
Yeah.
remember hearing that, and as a card carrying leftist, I thought, well, that doesn't at all align with my conception of harm minimization. I,
Mm.
I feel like there's some bigotry out there that could really harm people I know. And I'm not really sure
Mm.
that I stand with George Brandis on this. In
Mm.
fact, I think most people today who stand with Randa Abdel-Fattah have no idea how closely they align with
Mm.
the libertarian right on these matters.
Mm.
I think this inversion of any serious moral or critical engagement with what's going on and its replacement with libels is what has enabled every single bigotry, every single mass slaughter, every single extermination event in world history. People are
Mm.
groomed through permission structures to
Yeah.
genuinely believe things that completely misalign with their morals, right? But
Mm.
you cannot argue against bigotry because it always conspiratorially finds its way to weave its fingers through whatever it is that you believe. So
Mm.
now Israel's in a war. Now people in Palestine have been killed in the tens of thousands. There
Mm.
are people who are hungry, right? Right.
Yeah.
If you continue to attack this state through an eliminationist movement, keep it in a state of war, sacrificing your own people like cannon fodder into forever wars while you hide under tunnels, and
Mm.
then you point the finger and say, look, that genocide we told you was happening 60 years ago, that's it. Like
Mm.
it's these bigotries are self-perpetuating in that
Yeah.
they create the violence that then creates the situations uh, that end up really, really harming people. And that
Yeah.
harm gets retroactively fitted to the victim of the propaganda in the first place. So
Mm.
without anti-Zionism, we wouldn't be here. We just wouldn't be here.
No, that's
And
true.
and so the idea that a festival would not understand this doesn't surprise me, right?
Mm.
But what does surprise me is that people think that there are enough Jews in the world to prosecute and explain these basics when they just aren't. We're 0.4% of the population, and without non-Jews understanding these dynamics, we are actually stuck. The moment we
Mm,
try to
mm.
find other people who'll help us prosecute these dynamics, we're accused of being a lobby group and
Yeah,
corrupting government, and we're back to square one. So you're damned if you
yeah,
do, you're damned if you don't.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Joshua. Thank you. I think I'm not the most I've tried as much as I can to sort of get myself up to speed, but there's a lot of history, there's a lot of theory, there's a lot of different opinions swirling around. Obviously the idea of Zionism, anti-Zionism, and so forth. But what I have noticed just in my own little pond, I suppose, is definitely it is a new thing coming into the Australian literary scene. If you rewound about 5 years ago, people wouldn't know what a Zionist was or an anti-Zionist was, and suddenly everybody thinks they know, and it's what everybody's talking about, and it's taking down festivals and other institutions left, right, and centre. So I'm really interested in how that happened so quickly. And I don't know, in this podcast, we talk a lot about like sort of like woke ideology, like far left ideology. And one of the things I was really interested in is how it seems to me that anti-Zionism has become the new sort of part of that. It's kind of merged with that in a sense. So 20 years ago, 5 years ago, the worst thing you could be called was racist, for example. And then maybe 3 years ago, the worst thing you could be called was transphobic. And now the worst thing you can be called is a Zionist. So it seems like those two things have merged as well. And especially around the concepts of, the decolonial sort of theories and the critical race theories and things like that. They've kind of piggybacked, or this anti-Zionist movement is piggybacking on the woke movement. And so it has got to a point where I see a lot of people on social media, people I know personally in the Australian literature world, who feel, as you say, completely okay to say certain things, um, which curl my toes. And but they feel that it's the morally right thing to do, and I think that's the crux of it. It's not that these are bad people, but they are sort of the propaganda and the sort of, I don't know, just the whole zeitgeist gives them this permission to feel that actually taking this stance and fighting this phantom called the Zionist, who apparently is this, evil, blood-sucking sort of baby-killing monster, is the right thing to do, and they feel quite comfortable doing that, even while they simultaneously think of themselves as quite fair and good people. And I'm just sort of watching this process happen and move its way through Australian literature, and watching what it is revealing about people and psychology and how we all relate to each other. It's fascinating and very, very disturbing at the same time. And one thing that I really have noticed in the last couple of years is that Jewish people have resoundingly said, I'm no longer getting my books out there. I can't be published. I'm not invited to appear on festivals, blah, 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 blah. And this is resoundingly rejected by sort of the main sort of uh, institutions and people sort of running Australian literature. They don't see that at all. They actually are fighting against this phantom of Zionism, who they see as extremely powerful and tricky and blah blah blah. Not the actual people in front of them. The people who yesterday were their friends, who they thought were quite nice people, are suddenly being reframed as part of this terrible, this terrible shady group. And it's really, really sad to see people treat each other like that and lose their minds to the extent where critical thinking and interpersonal relations, I suppose, have been so degraded.
Yeah, uh, it's a reality check, I
Mm,
think, which is sad but important.
yeah,
Um, I a lot of a lot of Jews have been really marginalized over the last couple of years. As you said, in the creative arts. And I originally, I really was surprised,
Mm-hmm.
and it's strange to think now that in such a small time, in such a small space of time, not only does it not surprise me, but every Jew I know involved in the creative industries uh, have a completely different way of handling their careers, like in such a small space of time. Like I have three different CVs, right? Like one for the maybe they hate, you know, Zionists. Um, one for, one for I know they do, but I need this work, and then one for I'm cool. I can actually show them my entire body of work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, who else in Australia has that?
Mm.
Like, why is that? And like, no one, we didn't get together and like hive mind that out. It's
Mm.
something that I found through conversation that we had all done without discussing. It was a natural response to trying to live in the
Yeah.
world, was to partition ourselves. Um, and when you earlier, spoke about how quickly this seemed to have taken off, as though accusations of being a Zionist are now as bad as being accused of being a transphobe 3 years ago, or a racist, 5 years ago.
Mm.
Um, I what I think's really uh, fascinating about the anti-Zionist framing of Zionist
Mm.
um, is how omnicausal it is, right? It
Mm-hmm.
actually it kind of has such an a wide um, a wide embrace of all of the horrible things, right? So if you prima facie understand that an idea or a movement or whatever it is you constructed is innately like the worst thing, then
Mm.
it makes sense that all of the other worst things really easily fold into it. Like, of
Mm.
course, Zionism is colonialism, right? Of course, it's genocide and apartheid, but of course, it's also racism if you think about it. And it's actually sexism. And,
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
it's ecocide, right?
Right.
It's white supremacy.
Mm.
Um, every horrible thing, you know? And
Mm.
when you say, well, like actually, if you look at like six of their neighbors over the last blah blah blah, and we empty our just Jews, we empty out our pockets. We
Mm.
these horrible libelous accusations are thrown at us, and you empty out your pockets to show them the evidence, or you say, well, actually, what about this, 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 and it's only really recently that Jews have started to realize that like it doesn't matter. Like we've all
Yeah, it
become like
doesn't.
incredible amateur historians.
Mm.
Like, I had actually read far more anti-Zionist literature than Zionist literature because I've never been particularly interested in justifications for Zionism or like
Mm-hmm.
Israeli nationalism. It doesn't interest me. It doesn't
Mm.
interest me more than Australian nationalism or Pakistani nationalism, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just Pakistan was carved out of a chunk of British India to accommodate a religious minority.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I guess in theory, I could say, look, I actually think, given Pakistan's egregious human rights record, definitely a case to be made for genocide. There's definitely a case for apartheid, um, right? So I feel like, and colonialism, if you think about it, right? The same
Mm.
libels. And,
Mm.
Pakistanis aren't like a race, right? They're
Mm.
not a racially different group. So,
Yeah.
like, if I was to start a campaign about the importance of removing Pakistan, I could become an anti-Pakistanist, right?
Mm.
It's not racist, right? It's not anti their religion. They just don't like that they should be allowed to have their own state, right? It doesn't make
Mm.
sense to me. Think about all the people
Mm.
that were displaced and had to move across the border, hundreds of thousands
Mm.
of people. This eliminationist movement would be considered absolutely insane, right? But
It
it's
would,
catchy,
yeah.
but it's catching
It is catchy,
because
yeah.
for Israel or Zionism because of its omnicausal, right? The
Mm.
far left was already primed to sponge anything up that could
Mm.
be considered part of a previous omnicausal engagement with an
Yeah.
oppressor dynamic. So I
Yes,
think we
I
were
think
ready
that's
for it
it.
and waiting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where it dovetails into sort of, as you say, leftists, and in the arts, most people are left-leaning. It's just the way it is. I've always certainly been that way as well. But then I began to see, issues coming from sort of, I suppose you'd call it the far left, which really is just now most of the left, because things, dissent or any kind of nuance, it became verboten. So, there was a time when you could be a leftist, but you could agree on this point and disagree on that point, and that was fine, and everyone had a debate and maybe got a bit shouty and then you had a drink and moved on or whatever. Whereas now there's like a set menu of beliefs on the left which you must buy into 100%. And if you believe 99 but on the 1% you say actually on this, then you are sort of often pushed, it's pushed from the group, and you're not pure enough. So there's this purity spiral on the left, which I've witnessed over the last 5 years, which I think has been building for much longer than that, but has really sort of hit its peak since COVID and so on. And I just see that this anti-Zionist thing has kind of dovetailed into that, particularly in terms of the oppressed and oppressor dynamic, which is obviously one of the very sort of foundational core beliefs of a sort of critical social justice movement. So every power, there's power structures, language. Also, I'm really fascinated about the idea of, language being a tool of power and oppression when it's in the hands of the oppressors, and this whole sort of post-colonial idea as well. So, you know, I think that in many ways the woke movement didn't know what to do with Jews, because are they white? Are they not white? Are they marginalized? Are they oppressed? And then there became this moment where, as you say, this term anti-Zionism sort of rose up, or was fabricated and promoted, and it allowed people to put Jewish people under the label of a Zionist neatly into this paradigm, this power structure of oppressed and oppressor. And it allowed people to say, well, there you go, they're colonialists, they're oppressors, they're this, they're that. And that means that we can now just dump on them because, that's the next target. So to me, that started to become, creepingly clear since October 7th, 23. And it's now sort of broken out into things like Bendigo Writers Festival, like this with Adelaide Writers Festival. Yeah, it seems that most people feel that Zionism is not simply a belief that the state of Israel has a right to exist, or that Jews deserve a homeland or have a homeland, and that just is not something that should be withdrawn, but that it's an ideology, and it's a very destructive ideology. So I wondered if you could speak a bit to that. Like, what do most Australian Jews, just keeping it in our small pond, when an Australian Jewish person or non-Jewish person says they're a Zionist, what does that generally mean? Obviously, there's going to be a broad spectrum of views, and there probably are some Zionists who are very, dangerous or right-wing or whatever. But in terms of generally what your feeling is within the Australian climate, what do people mean when they say they are a Zionist?
Belief in the existence of a state of Israel.
Mm,
I was at the anti-Zionist, sorry, I was at the anti-Netanyahu actions in Melbourne before
mm,
October 7. Never saw an anti-Zionist.
yeah.
Well, it's just like this idea, again, we need to stop asking questions about how to define Zionism
Mm,
from the starting place of anti-Zionism. It's
mm-hmm,
kind of like asking in the 1930s in a milieu of anti-Semitism,
mm,
but what does being a Jew really mean to Jews?
mm,
Like the anti-Semite is not talking about Jews.
yeah.
It's just all the worst things, right? And then they put them onto Jews, and then they're like, okay, but we'll ask the Jew what they really think they are.
Mm,
It's completely bigoted and backwards.
mm,
The truth is that you need to start from a place of why are we asking about what the word Zionism means?
mm,
Where does that conversation come from? We're
yeah.
being forced to have that conversation by a bigotry that is incredibly popular.
Mm,
Why would Jews allow anything about Jewishness, whether it's the fact that a Jewish state exists, or whether it's the fact that a Jewish religion exists, or whether the fact that we share a common ancestry, why would we be comfortable with allowing non-Jews to tell us what that is,
Mm.
right? We have not been trusted when we described very clearly that our religion did not involve uh, using children's blood to make matzah.
Mm.
That our religion did not involve denigrating Christ, right? Christ isn't mentioned in Judaism, right? How could the guy, he came afterwards, you know? Like, we didn't, again, like, why would we have to explain? Actually, like, we're going to show you that our blood is not like impure, you know? The truth
Mm.
is that Jews were enemy aliens, right? They didn't have the same legal rights in Russia or in Germany or across Europe. And so, like, in a time when xenophobia is like a normal moral thing,
Mm.
right? Then asking the Jew through a xenophobic framework to explain what it is
Mm.
like so offensive,
Mm.
right? And today it's even more insane because Zionism is literally the word invented by a guy who saw that there probably should be a movement built around repatriation, given how hostile it was for the enemy Levantine aliens, right? Who were century after century being inundated with pamphlets and graffiti and harassment that said, go back to Palestine. And this guy, Herzl, was like, okay, let's like scope that out, right?
Mm.
Unpopular among Jews. Unpopular. Why? They're sitting there
Mm.
going, oh, we lived here for hundreds of years. We were kicked out of there. We're not going to let them kick us out of here. We're going to
Mm.
make this work. Jews
Mhm.
live in little enclaves with no state. Okay, safe enough,
Yeah.
right? But no, the Holocaust. That's a good anything anti-Jewish is a great way to show Jews that they might need to band together and do something about a situation, right?
Mm.
Holocaust, 6 million Jews dead. A lot of Jews were very skeptical of this idea of returning to such a dangerous place. Like, actually, you know what? Can't be worse. At least we can have our own space to administer. And then immediately the narrative is flipped. They're colonizers again.
Mm.
The Jew cannot win. 80 years later, I'm here on a podcast being
Mm.
asked, as though I'm a Jew in the 1930s,
Mm.
what does the word that we've used to construct you really mean to you?
Mm.
Nothing. I don't
Mm.
care. My partner and I disagree with each other on this, right?
Mhm.
We agree in theory, but not in practice. In theory, we agree that the word Zionism is an antiquated throwback that we shouldn't even bother using because it gives the anti-Zionists this, like, it almost agrees with them in a way because by saying that, well, I guess I do have to justify my position. I don't want to give that to
Mm.
anyone. I would never
Mm.
ask a Pakistani, what do you mean by what does Pakistan mean to you? And they tell me it means that Pakistan should be allowed to exist.
Mm.
What an offensive space to put someone in, right? It's disgusting. However, a lot of Jews have had to define themselves around being Zionists, myself included many times, and it's contextually appropriate to be fair. But the
Mm.
truth is that right now, the world defines Zionism through a lens of it having to prove itself legitimate,
Yeah.
when it really just means the state was built, it exists. That's it. I would only
Yeah.
have to define that in a situation where that was being brought into question. And no one would ever do that to any other country. The only reason it's
Mm.
done to this country is because of the libels that we've pumped into it.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's amazing the way that term has taken hold so quickly and so thoroughly that we can see people are just, I mean, just thinking about the Australian art scene, the writers scene, people are just outright, their whole world view and themselves is just completely Once you say I am a Zionist, then nobody listens anymore. There's nothing else to say. It's like you put yourself into this like untouchable basket,
Can
right?
I interject though?
Mm,
Because when you say I'm a Zionist, you're agreeing to what they've defined Zionism as.
mm-hmm,
And if you're a Jew and you define Zionism and you don't define it the way they want, that
mm,
makes you a Zionist, which makes your definition of Zionism untrustworthy and manipulative.
mm.
That's why I don't fuck with defining Zionism. You know,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I mean, it's a hard place to be because I know what it means, but I know what they're going to do with it, right? I may as well say to a new partner, actually, I have AIDS,
Mm,
right? I have
mm,
AIDS. She's just started talking about building a life together, you know.
mm,
Now, maybe I could say, well, actually, like it's not a death sentence anymore, you know. Actually, there's a lot of really good drugs out there, and there are ways in which we can have the life we wanted to have, and there are probably ways in which we could have kids too, and it's not you know, but it's still there in their head. But I know what AIDS really means, you
mm.
know? Maybe it's
Yeah,
different today to it was 20 years ago, but you know what I mean? You cannot
yeah.
deconstruct the bigotry within someone. It's like asking an African American, 120 years ago in America,
Mm,
but what does being an N-word mean to you?
mm,
Well, actually, I think that being an N-word and then just, it's like, that's your word, it's your construction with your
mm.
bigotry. Like,
Yeah, it's sad to see, as someone who likes words, and you someone who likes words, a writer who likes words, it's very sad to see words weaponized and definitions twisted and weaponized in the way they are, in this case particularly, but in lots of other ways in the Australian literary community as well, against each other, right? Um, I find that particularly sad that we waste our time doing that to each other rather than using words to understand each other. I was thinking about that in terms of the new hate speech laws that are sort of going to be debated within a couple of days within Australia. Yeah, I wonder what your views on that were, Joshua.
oh, look, I am, mm, I think the intention is good, right?
Mm,
Um, but I think it's a hard thing to speak on because I'm not a lawyer. I work around a lot of lawyers.
mm-hmm.
I did a few semesters of a law degree, but um, yeah, look, it doesn't look like good law.
Yeah.
And even if it was good law and I didn't know what I was talking about,
Mm,
um, it it's sad that so many of our responses to horrible things are raced through in a way that may actually um, not only adequately help deal with the problem, but
mm,
might make the optics of the situation so much worse. And there are a lot
mm,
of people who would argue, oh, you're just scared of the anti-Zionist bigotry, or you're scared of the anti-Semites, or whatever.
mm,
Yes, yes, I am. You
mm.
know, um, optics are actually very important,
Yeah, they're
and
super important these days,
there's
especially.
there's no reason to get high and mighty and moralistic about knowing your audience. And if your
Mm,
audience are anti-Zionists who are it already like highly suspicious of
mm,
any organization at all that might involve some type of Jewish input, right? It's
mm.
part of a lobby. Uh,
Yeah.
you actually do need to massage people better than have been massaged on this.
Mm,
And my biggest issue, really, my real issue, like personally,
mm,
if we look at the different ways in which Jews have been severely vilified in the last couple of years in Australia, or we look at the different ways in which vilification has been taken to courts,
Mm.
we find, I think, a great example is the Wertheim and Haddad case, right? And so Haddad is a preacher who said a bunch of malicious things. Wertheim uh, is the tip of the spear at the ECAJ, the Executive
Mm.
Council of Australian Jury, and he it took Haddad to court for defamation. Um,
Mhm.
Now, the court had to evaluate which of Haddad's statements were constituted vilification under Section 18C and
Mm.
which statements didn't. And it's really interesting when you pull out the different, and they're like, these are two sets of like really, really horrible things, right?
Mm.
And so you've got to work out, well, why is this illegal and why is this isn't? And it's fascinating. The way that we've
Mm.
constructed law is a
Mm.
response to the racial vilification of the past, right? When we look at how we construct our conception of vilification is a response to popular ways in which people hurt each other, right? That's probably good law. Um, but the problem is that because we've spent the last 80 years living in the shadow of the Holocaust, we continue to assume that anti-Jewish vilification means the same thing as anti-Semitism, right?
Mhm.
So, which is why you'll hear so many people say, they'll say things like anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. What they really mean is anti-Zionism is anti-Jewish vilification. But actually, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are two very different ways to skin a cat or skin a
Mhm.
Jew, right? So the anti-Semitism can be proven under Section 18C as a form of racial vilification, and you can see that in the Haddad case.
Mhm.
Anti-Zionism can't, because
Yeah.
instead of making overt reference to the blood quantum of the Jew, it refers to the Jews, the Jewish national sovereignty,
Mm.
Zionism. So for
Mm.
me, any new law around hate speech actually needs to speak to where the hate speech comes from. Look
Yeah.
at the last 80 years of harms incurred to Jews, not only just in Australia, but around the world, right? Like 850,000 uh, displaced in the mid uh, 20th century. 1968, 13,000 Polish Jews exiled, right? 1968, 13,000. This is in a country where anti-Semitism was illegal, right? They were exiled as
Mm.
anti-Semites. Sorry, they were exiled as Zionists by
Mhm.
anti-Zionists, right? 1972, Munich, right? Targets Israelis, kills and mutilates them. Early 1990s, what have we got? We've got bombings in Argentina, hundreds of Jews, right? Anti-Zionism. October 7, anti-Zionism, right? This is a race-based hatred. Um, Manchester, Washington, Colorado, Bondi Beach. Even Bondi Beach, he recorded a video saying he's down there to hurt anti-Zionists. He's down there to hurt Zionists,
Mm.
right? So we're attacking the wrong fish here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to actually deliver law that seeks to minimize the harm being incurred towards Jewish people, you would uh, you would actually deal with the permission structure that makes that possible right now. And the permission
Mm.
structure that makes that possible is not the same as it was in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
It's a new one. It's you tie them to a state, which brings us back to Randa. That's how
Mm.
she gets away with it.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
truly believe that she's not a classical anti-Semite,
No, I don't
you
think
know?
she is either, actually. I think she's very anti-Western.
I just think that the case to be made here is that anyone who wants to make anti-Zionism seem like less immoral or
Mm.
more reasonable than
Mm.
anti-Semitism has no idea what either of those two things are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I was thinking about why so many people in Australian literature were so immediately supportive of her. I mean, some of it has to do with a couple of years of sort of indoctrination about, Zionists, very, very bad. Other people made a point of saying they were standing up for her free speech. They weren't necessarily endorsing what she stood for, and in fact, they found some of her views quite abhorrent. but that they didn't believe that the board or that governance within the cultural sector should have that right to disinvite her, and that it was a free speech issue, which I don't agree with that. I don't think that her free speech has been impinged upon. I mean, she's still free to speak. I think that something like curation of a festival or any sort of thing it's always a choice of keeping people in and keeping people out, and people have their biases to decide, or their designs for what they're trying to curate to keep different people in or out. So I found that silly, but I also found it hypocritical, because she is somebody who herself has been quite vocal about keeping other people's whose beliefs, she doesn't agree with out. So there was the Thomas Friedman, people brought up that example. So in 24, he was invited to the festival, and I saw it reported that Adler allegedly said that if he was not disinvited, that she would walk from the festival, and she felt very, strongly about not representing his voice, which she saw as, very sort of distasteful and racist towards Arabs. So there's always going to be decisions that people disagree with. I don't see that that's necessarily a free speech issue. I think that's probably coming at it from the wrong angle. But I also just found that amazing that people didn't seem to be aware or didn't seem to care that Randa Abdel-Fattah is somebody who has been really herself signing a lot of open letters and agitating and lobbying a lot to have people whose beliefs she believes are very dangerous and make her feel culturally unsafe, excluded from things as well. And it seems to be a case of free speech for me, but not for thee, which I don't really agree with. And initially I was actually thinking, okay, well, at least Louise Adler, who, she's a very ballsy woman. She sort of doesn't step back from her controversy. So to me, it seemed initially that at least she had the courage of her convictions. I thought, well, at least she's invited Thomas Friedman in 24, and she was prepared to sit and listen to, have audiences listen to what he said, even though she didn't agree with his that particular New York Times article. But then it's come out in the last day or two that actually, no, she actually did lobby the board to try and get him disinvited. One of the board members, I think his name was Berg, I'm not sure his first name, came out and actually said, he actually stepped down from the board because he didn't feel it was going in a direction he was comfortable with, and he let it be known that she had threatened to resign if Friedman wasn't rescinded. So, there's also hypocrisy there on her part. So I don't understand why the Australian literary scene as a whole, I mean, this evidence is out there. It's not hard to find. It's in numerous reportings. It's not so black and white. You've got people lobbying on both sides of this thing, and then it brings into question, how do boards deal with this? How is art governed? Where does politics come into it? There's a whole lot of really interesting and important conversations to be had. But as long as the reality of the situation is denied, and everybody just wants to see Randa Abdel-Fattah and Louise Adler as just being free speech warriors and that's it, and we'll just support her. Unless we can dig a little bit deeper than that, we can't have important conversations about how to really govern things so that people actually can go to festivals, or publishers can publish more balanced things, and people can walk away if they're not comfortable with something, but that thing is not platformed or deplatformed. This signing of open letters against each other, this deplatforming, this cancelling, the arts is eating itself, and more institutions are starting to just sort of go down the gurgler, because it feels like we individually have no emotional regulation. People seem to just splat off at each other. And then governance doesn't seem to have any backbone and spine. And I know that can be difficult, but I expected more from someone from the Adelaide from Adelaide, because it's not as if this is 2020, this is 2026, and we've seen cancellations and things happen. We saw Bendigo happen. So in their statement, when they released their statement and they said they were prepared, their initial statement when they said that they were de-inviting Randa, that they said they were prepared for the kickback. And I thought, oh, no, you're not. And now look, a week later, so we initially had a couple of days of standing firm, and then there was some emergency meetings. People, withdrew from the board. Then an apology is issued. Randa then says she's taking legal action against the South Australian Premier and against the board. More board members resign, Adler resigns, and now we're at a point where everyone's made these unconditional apologies to Fattah and have invited her back and said, please come back to the 27 festival. She has agreed, but I hear that she has very recently put some sort of contingencies around her coming back, which I think you listened to this morning. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot there. I
Mm,
mean, she said that she would consider, Randa Abdel-Fattah said that she would consider returning in 2027, that she
mm,
would definitely return if Louise Adler was running the show next
mm,
year. And then she made three recommendations. So first was that there needs to be more racial literacy informed by Indigenous voices. Can only assume she means the Jews of the Levant.
mm,
She wants public institutions to have safeguards against lobbyists. Right
mm,
now,
mm,
we would need like a full half hour to really flesh out the insanity of that statement and the hypocrisy of that statement.
mm,
So all I say is this: it is a very bigoted statement about Jewish power.
mm.
That's what's going on here.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
Adler's statement was um, uh, quite similar. She said some quite punchy things about the shady Jewish power.
it's just,
I've got it somewhere.
I just wish they had some like, all of these people, I wish I could just invite them for a day of
Mm,
just like going around to the places and the people that they refer to as the Jewish lobby, and
mm,
just like showing them like where they work and how they work and like what it actually looks like. And
mm,
it's like a handful of very underpaid, very overworked people, like having terrible sleep and not being paid attention to and not being able to get in touch with a single MP but one or two, and only
mm,
Sky News wants to talk to you, and it's damaging, but at the same time sometimes it's okay and it's better than
mm,
nothing. And it is like this, the Jewish lobby, right, is like just this Sisyphean enterprise, right, of
mm,
just
mm,
pushing this rock up. I invited a friend to I ran a training schedule, sorry, a training night the other night for just how to respond to some of these bigotries.
mm,
And I invited some non-Jews along. And I was just like, this is literally what the Jewish lobby looks like.
mm,
Like, it is mostly like just this unpaid labor of desperation. And we have in our heads this like protocols of the elders of Zion kind of
mm,
um and so whenever the Jewish lobby is invoked by these people, I just think like you just got to see it, and you would know that it's again it's this it's done, the same thing is done with the word Zionism, right? They create a phantom using a word that is a symbol, and then they create so much meaning around that word and that symbol, and then they
mm.
use it as a scare tactic. And it is literally, again, it's how bigotry works, right?
Yeah.
Call the man an N-word and see the look on everyone's face,
Mm,
right? And then leave it to that person to defend themselves and what that word really means. It's no
mm,
different. And so this whole thing, number two, was that public institutions need to be protected from against lobbyists.
mm-hmm,
The
mm-hmm.
lawyers probably told her not to use the word Zionist lobby for 48 hours or something.
Mm.
But I don't think she's talking about Qatar.
Yeah.
Uh, and number three was that the government can't shirk its responsibility to Australian stakeholders by being influenced by foreign governments.
Mm. Mm.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
because
quite pointed. Yeah.
the Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda often refers to what's called global Zionism, right?
Mm.
Instead of the global uh, Jew, this nefarious Jewish enterprise, it just flips. And there is it is a particular cartoon I'll show you after, and you've got a Israeli person in a tank, and then this like leering, cloaked kind of Jew with the hooked nose
Yeah, I've
and
seen
it just
those.
says
Yeah.
global Zionism, and the global Zionism is the pushing of the Jew. And again, all of these things are they just I don't it's listening to Randa speak is like a Rorschach test, right?
Mm.
You learn so much about a person and their
Mm.
understanding of some basics by how they respond, what they see in what she says, right? And it's
Mm.
so obvious that she is invoking anti-Jewish sentiments. The
Mm.
question is whether Randa knows it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because when I read, I've read quite a lot of her statements and writings in the last few days, thinking about that. Yeah, I don't think she would definitely not see herself as an anti-Semite, I'm sure. Um, I think I see her more than anything as being um empowered by, or her framing is the whole sort of, yeah, the decolonialist sort of um, framework, and seeing Zionists as a part of that, rather than, I don't think she would see herself in that way. But I find it really interesting that these three conditions that she's given to coming back to the festival, they see they're also things that could be used against her and what she cares about. Do you know what I mean? Like, they probably won't be at this point in time, but they could be. And that's my contention with the new free speech or hate speech laws, I should say, and free speech rhetoric in general, in terms of anything that can be used to protect you can be also used to demonize you and to punish you. So it just depends who's got the upper hand in at government or in institutions at that point in time. So I just think we're playing with a lot of fire here. At I don't know, your words, our words are powerful. They do create our reality. So I think we have to be really careful now about moving forward and thinking that we can solve these issues just through the constrainment of words. I would rather see things. I would rather, okay, so they've invited Rhonda back in 27, and she has said, I will come back under these conditions, and she's keen for Louise Adler to be AD again, and that she would come back if that happened as well. What I would love Louise Adler to come out now and say is, okay, we understand we need to broaden our framework here, and yes, we will have Rhonda back, and we'll listen to, people, audiences have the chance to listen to her views, and we will invite A, B, C, and D. People with different views. We'll put her on a stage with people with different views and get into some meaty debates. I don't know. I just
Why would
don't.
they do that?
I know.
Why would
Why?
they open
Why wouldn't
themselves up
they?
to these are not serious people,
I
okay?
know. I
They're
know.
not we have like
But that's what I would
we've
like.
Michelle, I know that it is optimism and hope and
Mm,
faith that makes getting out of bed and doing what we do possible. But fuck, it is a tremendous fuel for disappointment.
mm,
And, I think that like an honest appraisal here of these people that shouldn't dampen our capacity to keep doing life, but should definitely help us through some of the disappointment, is to acknowledge that we're not dealing with serious people. And just
mm,
because they're wearing nice clothes and they stayed at uni long enough to get letters behind their names and they did all of the things that the institutions that they say are the problem asked them to do and became products
mm,
of those institutions and now are only there to reinforce power structures they pretend are actually resistance structures. They are clowns. right? These are
Mm,
clowns. Louise Adler is respected by so many people. I can think of
mm.
many clowns who have been respected by so many people over the centuries. Randa Abdel-Fattah, respected by so many people. I don't care, and neither should you, right? We're above it. They're clowns. These are clowns. They're fun to talk about because they are the ones who are stuck in a game show that we get to watch. That's the
Mm,
best part about being us. We get to watch and throw popcorn, right? We get to talk about them with
mm.
serious people without having to actually tolerate them. It's
Yes, but
wonderful. They're
they're writing
stuck.
the show at the moment.
Who's watching the show? Other people
No, they're
like them.
writing the show.
Yeah, but that no one's the only people. Look, earlier you spoke about the arts eating itself.
Mm,
Cool. Now what? Like
yeah.
I feel like if there are only it feels to me like all the people who are really interesting and fun and like blew my mind in the arts have
Mm,
been pushed out, right?
yeah, same. Yeah.
Leaving only its worst elements.
Yeah.
You know what? That's a heap safer space to navigate.
Well, you
Because now
know
you
what you're dealing
know.
with. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. That I feel that as well. It feels like in the last 5 years that the art sector has just become the activist art sector, right? And that everyone's just being led by the nose to either agree or disagree to certain points and to be excluded or included based upon that. And the writing itself has become very secondary. To the politics. And of course, political writing's always been a thing, and it should be, but now it's the thing and the only thing, and it's the price of entry to the thing. And yeah, that makes me very sad and despondent. And maybe these institutions having these crises is not, it's not such a bad thing because it's exposing what is there. To me, it seems more and more obvious that there's a little big difference in opinion between the actual writers in the art sector, the artists, who see themselves as resistance, as warriors, sticking it to the man. And in a sense, writers have always done that, and that's kind of the job to be a little bit, a little bit like that. But really, that is then the arts governance bodies try and corral that and control it so it doesn't get too unruly, and so their own jobs aren't put under under jeopardy as well. And then there's this kind of tension between the two, going back and forth, and a distrust between the two. And now people are calling for boards such as Adelaide Writers Festival to be, packed with writers and artists rather than people, business people and so forth. But I can see that going astray as well because that becomes another monopoly. Like one thing, I think it's an interesting, well, not interesting, but it's important to discuss ideas of free speech and who is silenced and if someone is disinvited, because there's a lot of Palestinian writers who over the last few years might have said they have also been, there was Karen Wilde with her fellowship from State Library Queensland, Omar Saka, a few other people, Sabsabi, obviously. So all these sort of things have been, going on over the last few years, and people have been framing them as a free speech issue. I don't think they are a free speech issue. I think it's just a matter of, well, it's a matter of privilege and power, and how that plays out at the time. So you would have people from that side of things saying, well, actually, we see this these boards, these governance bodies as being very right wing, conservative, against us, and we are pushing back and we're the resistance. So there's this framing, which to me seems very immature,
Mm,
and it means that we're all just going to be at each other's throats, and institutions and organisations and writers' festivals will continue to go down the tubes as we tussle back and forth. But I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is or what other structure would work for the arts.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think Subsabi is a real artist, you know?
I do too, yeah.
Um, and I think that and myself included, to be perfectly frank, at the very beginning of the Subsabi affair, I was
Mm,
angry at him,
hmm
like I felt angry at him. I felt like whatever. I won't hash it out. But
Yeah.
I was pissed off at Khalid Sabsabi. Never met the guy, right?
Mm.
And it took me a couple of weeks to really understand that he is a real artist and he is creating conversations that he wants to
Mm.
have. Like, I would, even when I was shitty at him, I didn't think he should be like
No, I didn't either.
silenced.
Yeah.
But I did think that his selection was like kind of gross.
Mm.
And I felt like, well, if you make a shitty decision and shuls keep getting burnt, and this guy's work is actually being used as part of that conversation,
Mm.
whether it's his fault or not, he's not the guy to represent the country. Um, and that position of mine stayed the same, despite the fact that my resentment originally on him adjusted to a real resentment of those who I actually felt like had kind of done him dirty. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like he should be allowed to have those conversations with his art. He should be allowed to say what he
Yeah.
wants. He should be allowed
Yeah.
to say things that I think contextually right now are a lot, but they wouldn't be a lot if they hadn't been selected for the Biennale. But it had instead been something that I'd just gone and seen and thought,
Yeah.
given what we know about this guy and where he's come from and his world and his people, like this is
Mm.
actually how you engage in a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact that he, as a symbol, and his art were weaponized by a system, by a
Mm.
power structure,
Mm.
posing as a resistance to a power structure, is what
Mm-hmm.
I found so frustrating. And my resentment
Mm.
very quickly went from Sabsabi the artist onto these institutions full of people who
Mm.
use others. We see it in Australian art all the time, how
Mm.
Indigenous artists get co-opted by
Yeah.
these white institutions and basically paid to dance. And there have been some terrible examples of this happening and Indigenous
Mm.
artists being ostensibly robbed for their labor.
Mm.
He's a real artist. Now, Omar Sarkar and Karen Wilde, or
Mm.
what's her new name now?
Ren
Yeah,
Wild.
Ren
Yeah.
Wilde. Yeah. So they are bigots,
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
And I think that the, importance of having people who understand not only art, but culture, society, community, politics,
Mm.
right? On a board so, is an amalgamation of different elite appreciations of different facets of a society that come together
Mm.
to make decisions as a whole that reflect something bigger than one
Yeah.
particular person's viewpoint. So
Yeah.
no real serious board in the world could look at Omar Sarkar's work or Karen
Mm.
Wilde's work and
Mm.
genuinely see that as representing much more than bigotry, right?
Mm.
Subsabi's different, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that all these people who selected Subsabi, as it turned out, again, not really very serious people. They folded and unfolded as quickly as the community made them feel safe and unsafe, right? These are
Mm.
just like they're kind of like leaves in the wind in a way. There's no real integrity behind that. Um, so yeah, I think that ultimately, like how we select these groups,
Mm.
is totally a product of a societal problem that goes far beyond like the board or
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
arts.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I
think
don't know. I
it's
don't. I
a,
don't
I
have like
think
a fix. I just have complaints. So.
yes, same. I think that though coming to that point, it's been years and years of people not feeling they were able to dissent from the popular view in the arts without being excluded or not given work or hated on. I think there's been quite a few years leading up to it where, for example, um, once again, in the arts, people, for example, when Ren Wild had her fellowship from State Library Queensland rescinded and her Black and White Prize rescinded, people said, oh well, it was just one tweet. Now I've been following Ren Wild on social media for a long time, and it's definitely not just one tweet. She put out tweets when Yaha Sinwar was killed, saying, the poor martyr and this and that. Her stance is very clear. So to try and pretend her stance is different than what it was disingenuous. Um, so, people then still standing up for her because they believe it's her right to have be platformed in this way. But it is not a free speech issue. We don't have a right to win a prize or to be platformed. And if institutions feel that a particular person doesn't represent the sort of views that they can condone, then that's a choice and that's a consequence. So I think this whole thing of free speech is a bit of a red herring, but I feel like the reason people have felt that within the arts generally have felt that they must support people like Ren Wild, and they will go to great lengths to do so, and even to say, listen, I don't necessarily endorse her views, but is because everyone's being bullied. Everyone's been kind of bullied into thinking like, if I don't fly this particular flag, I'm not going to, be in with the crowd, or everyone's going to sort of jump on me. I think it's the end result of quite a lot of kind of unspoken silencing and bullying and self-censorship that occurs within the arts itself before it even gets to the point of coming into conflict with any boards or governance bodies that might disagree. It's a very own strange ecosystem, and there's a lot of talk from people like Louise Adler about, her statement was like, they're coming for you, and I'm wondering who they are. Who is they coming for you? That was quite telling. But there's this us versus them thing. Here we are the poor struggling artists, and these are the people who are making all the money off our backs, and it's us versus them. I just see that as a really false dichotomy. It's one thing to be discussed, but there's another thing to be discussed which no one ever discusses in the arts, which is what we sort of try and discuss on this podcast, which is the dynamics that are taking place to sort of silence and influence each other within the arts culture generally, which have grown stronger and stronger over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, where you used to be able to dissent, as I said, even if you considered yourself quite a progressive, leftist person, you used to be able to say, I agree with this, but you cannot now without everybody kind of jumping on you. And it's caused people to really withdraw so that only the loudest and the sort of the ones who are made of Teflon and don't mind a bit of battle, are there. So there's this sense that like there isn't a collection of voices anymore which balance checks and balances to each other within the community. And that's where I think it's sort of very polarized. Like the arts community thinks all this way, and then the governance thinks this way, and they're having this big clash, right? I don't see it as that as the full story at all.
Yeah, I I think it's an inversion or perhaps like a narrative that a lot of us have to tell ourselves, Um, the reason it's hard for me is because that there are a whole litany of things that are working against me. Like there's some big power structure against me. And like that is always true, right? And the real
Good
question
point.
is the real
Yeah.
the real question is like just working out like where is my part here?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's not like you're supposed to have agency over your whole life and everything. Like it's a fantasy. No
Mm,
one, it's
true.
the truth is that like something or someone is always going to shit on you a little bit,
Mm,
and you might have like to find a way to work out how to prevent that yourself.
mm,
And as somebody who's struggled through the arts for years,
mm,
um, I hit my late 20s, and I just I was like working in construction and just trying to make ends meet, and I couldn't make it work. I couldn't
mm,
make the idea of creating, and paying rent work at the same time, really.
yeah.
And what I found really interesting was that I actually just like threw myself into landscaping.
Mm,
I like built a landscaping business, and I just went, I can't do this stuff. It's too hard. I stopped playing gigs. I stopped playing in bands. I played a couple gigs every now and then. I
mm,
basically stopped writing, and I spent 6 years like just in trade, right? And that is what gave me the capacity to create now. I spent my
Mm.
whole 20s waiting to like for it to matriculate, and like I would just find a way and find a cheat code. And like no, what happened was I had to take a chunk out of my life and build a buffer zone
Yeah.
that gave me like a gave me something, gave me some faith in myself because the arts completely
Yeah.
it's
It's
hard to have
brutal. Yeah.
it's hard to have a healthy self-esteem when everything is about your entire self-esteem is invested in how you're received by others, and what you're producing is so
Mm.
subjective, right?
Mm. Mm.
And I sometimes I just like if I have any arts inclined kids one day, right? I will encourage them to do a trade,
Mm.
right? Get good with your hands, like and learn how the world works and learn how brutal it is everywhere and how unfair it is everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it should be like this. I'm not saying when you go
No,
to a
I agree.
construction site and someone calls you a faggot at 6
Mm.
a.m. that you should
Mm.
be happy about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or every time you ask to put on a harness because you're, 20 meters up in the air on a slate roof at 6 o'clock
Mm.
in the morning in winter in Melbourne, and
Mm.
someone calls you a faggot, right?
Mm.
Like, it's not nice. Or the way in which there was some horrible stuff, but also having been so cling wrapped in the school I went to, and then the university I went to, and then the share
Mm.
houses I lived in, and then just finding myself, I just expected it would all work, and it didn't. And I had to
Yeah.
do it from scratch, and I had to be the bottom of the bottom on construction sites for
Mm.
a while, and then I look at the way in which power and privilege and structure is argued about in the arts.
Mm.
And it's kind of like when you go to a restaurant with someone who never worked in hospitality and
Yeah.
you hear the way they speak to the waiter, and you're like, do you know how hard it is to work here? Like,
Mm.
do you know how hard it is to make this? And so
Yeah,
I think
it
that
feels very divorced from reality, doesn't
yeah,
it? You know,
they've
when we
no,
have these,
yeah.
they're very intellectual, theoretical conversations that we have in the arts, and there's a sense that if it's not working for you, it's because possibly you're being discriminated against on one level or another about something or other, and
And you
or that
probably
there,
are.
and you could be, yes,
Like,
yeah, that happens, that's life. And
world
there's
is bad
also,
often.
yeah. And in Australia, the arts aren't terribly, terribly well thought of or well funded, and so there's this sense, well, it's not fair, and all, but this is life, and yeah, I think that I think that the arts community needs to get back in touch with people on the construction sites and so on, because it's interesting that the views that we have and that go around our little bubble are often very out of step with the broader community. There's often a much broader range of views which people are much less shy about talking about. And so for a sort of little industry or a scope of people who feel they're all about discussion and discourse and free speech. I think we're one of the most closed down sectors of Australia, to be quite honest. We've closed each other down, especially. I find it really interesting that this language of safetyism around culture, the cultural safety, okay, that began with the woke movement, and it was weaponized against, say, the white person who is racist and they don't have my cultural safety, or the homophobe or whatever. Now you've got people like Randa also, so people who were who sort of weaponize that language in many cases. And I'm not saying it doesn't always happen. There isn't discrimination and people aren't doing you dirty. Sometimes that is true, but there was definitely a sort of a trope and a weaponization of that language of safetyism from sort of 2020 onwards. And now it feels like they're just using the same words and the same tactics. Everyone's just gone, well, if you're going to do it, I'm going to do it. So let's all just keep slinging this same mud back at each other, and we're swinging from left to right, from left to right. And yeah, I suppose I'm thinking about this on more of a personal level, but even if I venture onto, say, Facebook and, chime in, which I do less and less these days, with any sort of opinion on something, um, people of my age, middle-aged people who are sensibly quite intelligent people and see themselves as very progressive and open-minded, you can say less and less to them without everybody just going off like a firecracker. And I feel like I'm
Mm.
living on an island and thinking, where did everyone's emotional regulation and maturity and open-mindedness go for? I thought that's what we were trying to do in the arts, and it seems that we do that less now, less well than your average Australian is capable, of doing.
It's such an interesting point. I don't want to. So you got to like tell me to shut up when you know. But I will never forget. Like I had I was working. I'm down in Mount Martha, which is like south of Melbourne, on a block. It's like 40 degrees, and they've just introduced these COVID restrictions, so people can't
Mm,
go anywhere. It's very, I'm working with landscapers, right? And we're taking a smoke break and just sitting in the sun, and I'm listening to these guys have this conversation about the political implications of these restrictions and moving people, how it affects their business, how it affects their kids, picking up from school, they can't take them to school, homeschooling,
mm,
um, and what we could do, where we could work, how to change our jobs. And then you know, get back up into Melbourne just in time for my lecture or my tutorial at RMIT. And I'm sitting there with a bunch of people who are just all parroting the exact same things. And
mm.
like to be honest, a couple of those landscapers these were like conspiracy theories about Dan Andrews, being a communist and stuff. But it was riveting to be around just conversation that was
Yes,
wild. And then I get back
yes,
to RMIT and it's this like just this laser focus on
yeah.
nothing. And I'm in there in my, like, I would often turn up in my work boots in mud and shit and just
Mm,
sitting among these people who would then lecture each other about the plight of the worker.
mm,
And I was
mm,
like, I just, it was quite amazing how my experience of university
mm.
was actually a whittling of the conversational parameters that I was
Yeah.
able to have when I was
Yes.
bartending or when I was working, in trade.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, the conversations in the arts are narrower, more censored, self-censored than anywhere else I have encountered. And it didn't used to be that way. I'm old enough to remember the before times when you were allowed to say whatever and people didn't agree with you and sometimes they even threw things at you. Like I remember talking to Robert Adamson, who's a poetry mentor of mine, and he said, there was big poetry wars you haven't heard of the poetry wars, or do
I'm
you?
writing this down. Hold on.
Oh yeah, those poets get wild.
Was it before or after the Emu Wars? Hold on,
I don't have
Poetry
no
Wars.
idea. It's like the 1970s sort of time. And anyway, he said, you'd be reading, you stand up and read, and then if someone didn't like what you were reading, they didn't bother they just threw a beer can at you, a full one often, and it was just the way it was. Like, then there was lots of punch-ons and
I
this
don't
and that.
believe that. Poets cannot
Uh,
afford to throw away full beer
Oh,
cans.
someone would have caught it and drunk it for sure.
There you
But and I'm not saying we should all start, having fisticuffs, but there was a time when artists were allowed, and it was normal. And now we have gotten to a point where everyone is so timid, and I believe we can be better than that. I really don't believe that we are all as fragile as we are being told that we are. And I think that's one of the reasons I make this podcast. I don't particularly love making this podcast, and I've had a lot of people say to me like, "What? Just get back to writing, Michelle. Just focus on the writing." And that is important. I think that these kind of political issues will never well, they'll always come in one form or another. And if you, as an artist, you let yourself get too swept away from them to the extent where you're not focusing anymore on what you love, which is the poetry or whatever your form is, then you're doing yourself a grave disservice. But I also feel that we've come to a point where someone has to say something a little bit different. Just or at least, no one has to agree, but someone has to throw ideas up and say, listen, we can throw ideas up and the world doesn't end, right? Um, And well, maybe because I've already been cancelled, that's given me a lot of freedom to go, okay, well, may as well be me then, what's the worst that can happen? So that's kind of where I come from it. And I suppose I read an interesting, getting back to the Adelaide Writers Festival, I read the article by Izzy Oderberg, and I really liked her article. I liked her article on Bendigo as well. I sort of have a similar position, which I think I'm trying to find it, but she basically said something like, I find Randa Abdel-Fattah's views,
Yeah,
quite
is
odious,
he?
but, I defend her right to say them. I defend Ran Wild's right. I defend Masaka's right. And I actually feel the same. I don't know if other people would find that offensive and think, well, why would you platform people who have openly said bigoted things about anybody? But I just think the
Well,
alternative is worse, I suppose. And I wouldn't. I mean,
yeah.
if I was running a festival, I wouldn't ask Randa Abdel-Fattah to come, because I would probably have a no dickheads policy, basically. But I would never argue against someone like that being included unless they had actually, broken a law, or whatever. I would instead just include other voices and just let everyone at it. I'm not sure if that's the best way to go about it. That's just my instinct, because I don't
Hmm.
see that trying to then restrict what people are saying is going to lead to a better outcome. But I'm open to discussion about that, because it's a really tricky one to know how to change things, how to shift things away from this weird monoculture we live in the arts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that you go about dealing with this problem is probably not to think about free speech in like absolutist terms.
Mm,
I feel like once we start asking ourselves questions like, well, should we have free speech or shouldn't we have free speech? And then we kind of boil it down that way. Like
mm,
it's actually impossible to have
yeah,
free speech. That's in
yeah.
a world where someone can come up to you and hit you in the face and say, "Don't say that." You don't
Mm,
have free speech, right? It's like talking
mm,
about really existing capitalism versus actual capitalism, not happening, right?
yeah.
Same with, you know, the opposite. And I don't know, like I think Izzy Oderberg's piece handles the question really well.
Mm,
I mean, she's a genius, and I would consider her a mentor. Um,
mhm,
and I don't agree with the platforming of Randa Abdel-Fattah,
mm,
right? And so therefore, I agree with the festival's right to uh, recall her as though Toyota was recalling a vehicle that could cause harm to people, right?
mm,
Um, but I think what Izzy's able to do is something that I've seen her do in real life, right? Where she engages with these questions really seriously,
mhm,
and instead of like deciding on a thing, she ping pongs. And the ping pong isn't about being indecisive
mm,
or flaky. It's about like she really whittles down things to its bare elements until she goes, okay, you know what?
yeah,
I've got this, right? And
mm,
where she
mm,
landed was where she landed. I think
yeah,
that, when you do it that way, right, when you
yeah,
actually engage with what's going on and
mm,
say, look, I defend this person's right to be able to say stuff.
mm,
That principal engagement with the topic is actually very rare. And
yes,
yes, it opens Izzy up to criticism, right?
mm,
That's what integrity does,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And like I I couldn't have written what she wrote because I don't fully agree. But if I was her and I felt that way,
mm,
I'm not sure I would have like had the balls to write it. But because she
yeah,
has such a history of engaging with things that way, I
mm,
think she pulled it off very, very well. And I think it's an important thing for people to read. It was published in the Jewish Independent, and
yeah,
within our community, like it's an important take to cover, and it's important to remember
Mm,
that like you don't have to agree with someone's
no,
opinion to
no,
even like be their
no.
friend, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes,
um,
exactly. Yes. That used
yeah.
to be normal that people had friends of all different political persuasions, and it was actually quite fun, and it led to some great conversations, right? And
Well, she
uh,
does, and it shows in the way she
yeah,
writes, I
yeah,
think. Yeah.
yeah. I love that. I love that she's got the balls to do that. I'm sure she gets criticism from, all sides, because when you're sort of ping-ponging around trying to find a truth in the middle, then usually you don't please most people who really want to see things in a black and white way. One of the very sad things that kind of illustrates my frustration with the arts at the moment is because I saw Izzy's article about Bendigo, and I really liked it. Once again, she pretty much had the same take, which is that, you know, she let Randa come, let her say, and let someone else come and say back, and that's that. And I didn't think that was terribly controversial. And then I put her article up on Facebook, and I had a lot of people say to me, oh, no, no, would you just let her, why should we listen to someone come and talk about genocide? Why should, they just went straight back to their worldview and they couldn't frame it in any other way. And then I had someone actually also say, um, I said, no, just read the article. Have you read the article? It's actually very nuanced. It's really worth doing. And this person, who would not see themselves as a bigot, said,
None of them do.
I wouldn't read anything from a Jewish news outlet. It's from Jewish Independent. I said, yeah, it offers a really wide range of views. I would never read anything from a Jewish outlet. And I said, with respect, that is a really bigoted thing to say. And then that person just stopped engaging with me. But they could not see that even just that statement, that I wouldn't even read it, not even believe it, or just, you can read it, you can disagree, you can read it, you can Google the facts in there and disagree and make up your own mind, but I
Mm.
wouldn't even read it because it comes from a Jewish outlet. I was like, wow. Okay, and that was a very popular view on Facebook. People were pressing like on that comment, and it was I was like, oh, okay. So there was I could for me that was just a little aha moment of how far the slippage has gone in terms of, as you said, using that term anti-Zionism to be able to then to just sort of pave the way for any sort of dehumanization and dismissal of the reality of people. And someone I think in the arts who's done a good job, but who gets a lot of flack as well, is Lee Kaufman. So she co-edited the Ruptured
Mm.
Anthology of Jewish Women's Writing in response to October 7th, which was, yes, fabulous book, which was not and should definitely have been on Louise Adler's list, I think, for the festival. I mean, there are some really important writers and great essays in there. For that not to have been given a trot around, I think she said there's only one writers' festival in the country this year who have actually agreed to have discussion of the book, which is just ridiculous because normally if you had a book of that caliber with that many writers who could be appearing around the country because it comes from lots of women in different states, it would be a real winner, and a lot of festival directors would be normally keen to focus on that. So Lee said to me, or she said to us, to a lot of people, I heard her say it at the launch of Ruptured, that, she was very leftist leaning as well, and she said she's Russian, I think she's Russian, Israeli, and Australian. So she said she didn't have a particular sort of nationalistic feeling about anything. She sees herself as being quite a sort of a bit of a rebel in her own way, but that she never, when Putin invaded Ukraine, she was never asked to take on that guilt or to justify herself as a Russian, in the same way that she has been as a Jewish Australian, and that difference, that really says it all. I often find that if people are, and if I am confused about whether something is, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, whatever, if you just swap out the examples, it becomes much clearer. And I've just found that really disturbing to see people in the Australian literary scene turn against or dismiss or dehumanize, Australian Jewish writers who before, they were happy to include and befriend, I find it really frightening that we've got that capacity in our minds to go to for whatever that propaganda or whatever psychological steps we're taking independently and socially, because I think social contagion is a big part of this. It's frightening. It's frightening that we still have that in ourselves, and we can, people who feel they are quite good and progressive and intelligent people are still that still happens, and we look back at something like the Holocaust as a history, but it's not. And as you say, it's reinventing itself under this new term, anti-Zionism. And I think I wish in the arts people would really grapple with that and start to see each other as individuals, and really try to understand each other rather than pick sides and try to be right. It's like we're all just trying to be right and to signal that we're on the right side of this or that. And yeah, it's getting us nowhere really quickly, or nowhere
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I mean, look, I think that the institutional reception of Lee Kaufman and Tamar Palak's Ruptured
Mm,
is the best example of why it needs to exist and how important it is, right? The institutional lack of appreciation for such a seminal insight into
mm,
the current experience of an Australian minority inundated with bigotry,
mm,
not being platformed, being ignored,
mm,
being
mm,
deemed problematic,
mm.
um, is a sign of the bigotry continuing to be at play.
Yeah, and
We
not
both
just,
know how
yeah,
bad so many of these texts that get platformed are. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
so much work is so bad, and
I know.
it's actually really good work.
Yeah, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
interesting because I see that the sort of the non-platforming of Ruptured, it has come in on an institutional level from, organizations, arts bodies, festivals, and so forth. It's also at a lower level, just within the sort of the individuals within the literary scene. It's pretty much ignored and not engaged with on that level as well. And that's what I find more disturbing in some ways, because I understand that, I don't agree with, but I understand institutions are always trying to shy away from things that they don't feel will go down well. And because the art sector is so left leaning, they feel that is going to not go down well, and someone like Randa will go down well. And actually, in this environment, they're quite right. But I find it really interesting that people within the arts and literary scene who, they say that, for example, Ran Wild, was cancelled, or that it's not fair, her thing was rescinded, or same for Omar Saka, and so forth. But that what they do have, they may have been deplatformed by an institution, okay, and that may or may not have been fair. And as I said, that's not something I would support, to be honest. But that's one argument, right? The other argument is that they have a lot of support within the Australian literary scene, within that group. So while it's always going to be difficult if you have work or a fellowship or a prize taken away from you, okay, and you can argue that may or may not be unfair, they have the support of Australian literature, the broad support of Australian literature. They have hundreds and thousands of people signing letters on their behalf, lobbying on their behalf, and making noise and making them feel like this isn't fair. You're okay. We support you. We've got you, right? And so that is very different than the actual experience of cancellation, which is when it's not when you get, when a festival says, oh, we don't want you there, because people are quite used to being rejected by publishers and festivals and things for many, many reasons. It's when your own community turn on you that a lot of the psychological damage is done. And that's what's being done, I feel, to the Jewish community within the literary and arts community. It's that more personal psychological damage, which people like Sabsabi or Randa, as I said, are fair or unfair, whether you believe they should be platformed or not platformed, they have the backing of their community. Of course, they also would experience there's a lot of racist, there's a lot of horrible trolling. I mean, I've been online and seen horrible comments, from both sides of the aisle on that. But generally within their own community, probably 5% of people are vocally supportive, and that has to count for something, right? So, but for the Jewish community, they haven't had that. They haven't had the institutional backing, but they also haven't had the backing of individuals, whose back they had often, because often I found that a lot of Jewish writers, as I say, most of them must have been in the arts, very left-leaning, and they were always the first ones to be often talking on behalf of others and standing up for freedom of speech and so on. And it's must have been, very hurtful not to experience that back.
I don't think that you can or anyone can really expect like reciprocity in the arts or coherency or consistency. I mean, even when we
Not
invoke
anymore.
words, but even when you invoke words like right, or we invoke words like right and left, though, like
Mm,
I don't, when I hear the word left wing being used today, I feel as though it's being used as a defense for a position that's only merit lies in the moral foundation
mm,
that the user is kind of injecting into it. So, like, if you are talking about a thing and you're doing it from a space of being like, I'm the most moral actor here, we assume
mm,
it to be left wing. And that's all,
mm,
that's all that means. And like, everyone thinks that they're moral. Like, no one in the world is like, oh, I'm just going to be immoral today. Right. And we're not all left wing. So we have to ask ourselves
mm.
the question. I mean, sure, there might be a couple assholes, but really, like, we all do think that what we are doing is the most moral thing, you know?
Oh, I
Um,
don't think of left wing as being moral at
but
all.
they do. I
Yes.
think that it justifies itself as a form of moralism. And I remember when I
Mm,
was living in a share house with Marxists in my early 20s, and I think
mm.
I was a bunch of them, there were hammer and sickle tattoos and pictures of, Stalin and Mao up on the wall and,
Yeah.
you know, and I remember being lectured about moralisms. Do not talk about politics. Do not talk about your left-wing politics as a
Mm,
moralism. It's too doesn't make sense. Like this is a math. This is a science to this. And that really stuck with me. And I really found a tremendous amount of respect for that real leftist kind of kernel, that
mm,
we're not here to like browbeat you with moralisms. And so it was strange when I'd walk into university and people referring to themselves as left wing would
mm,
actually, there'd be nothing left wing about what they were saying at all. They just
mm.
inferred they must be left wing and
Yeah.
identified as left wing. So I don't
Gotcha.
know. I think today, like the writing community that, or arts community that is self-referentially left wing
Mm,
is isn't at all left wing. I mean, let's think about the basics, right? The left wing believes in having a freedom uh, from the harms of others, right?
yeah.
Or freedom to have the freedom from the harms of others, which is guaranteed by the state, which is why the left pioneers things like harm minimization,
Mm,
regulations when it comes to speech and hate speech and all the rest. That's a leftist
yeah.
pursuit. The left quite deliberately curtails free speech in order to make sure that everyone is safe. And
Mm,
they've been bullied about that for being snowflakes for years. You know, I don't know why today what's going on with Randa Abdel-Fattah is in any way, or anyone in the arts and free speech matters is being, dollied up to being like a left-wing pursuit. There's no
mm,
left or right here at all. People
mm,
are using
mm.
these words really, really
Loosely.
arbitrarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more just about finding a little cohort of people who'll make you feel safe by agreeing with everything that you say,
Yeah.
and then protecting each other by burning witches who don't agree with you as a cohort.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, listen, it's quite brutal out there now, It's I think the arts is more brutal than maybe even the I think I'd take the landscapers, at least what you see is what you get, and someone will call you something to your face and you can say something back and then you move on. And in the arts is a much murkier type of brutality. That's what the poetry wars were about. And there was one particular poet who identified, he said that Australian poetry was like a knife fight in a phone box. And yeah, it's just this kind of often, taking down of the other in all these surreptitious and wordy ways, often, which I think I would prefer someone just call me something, to my face or throw a beer can at me.
Mm.
Yeah. So anyway, maybe we need to put a cap on it. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you'd like to bring up, Joshua?
No, no, I think I'm pretty much exhausted it. I definitely need another coffee.
Yeah. It's
And
been an exhausting week just actually keeping up with the twists and turns.
I know, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we've had stuff on in the evenings. We went and saw Simon Tedeschi and Ben Adler play last night at the
Oh,
Camelot
okay.
Lounge in
Yep.
Marrickville, which was really fun. They're so
Mm.
good. Um, yeah, we've had things on. I can't even remember what we did Wednesday night. You know, we did a thing. We definitely did a
We
thing.
did a
Oh my
thing.
God, yeah, what was it? Oh, anyway, I'm not even going to talk about that. But yeah, the only thing I would plug is the movement against anti-Zionism,
Hmm.
which is kind of like an educational resource, really. It's not an organization or a lobby group.
Mm.
Very loose group of people around the world who are really just providing educational resources and training on how to distinguish between bigotry and
Mm.
actual criticism so that we can
Hmm.
know when conversations should happen, how they should happen, and on what terms, and
Mm.
know when, this we're actually just experiencing bigotry because like we opened with the lack of differentiation
Yeah.
between one and the other means
Yeah.
that hate speech or vilification really can so easily present itself as criticism. And during a war with the atrocities that are happening, they feed
Yeah.
so easily into bigotry. So the movement against anti-Zionism, MAAZ, definitely
Hmm.
worth looking up if you're interested in knowing more about just how to identify some of these different ways of talking about these things.
Thanks, Joshua. We'll put a link in below. I think that's really important resource, obviously, first and foremost for anti-Zionism, but it sounds like something that you could actually extend into other general bigotries, which could be really, I just think that's what we need. We need to speak more, but we need to do it in a different way, a more constructive way, and a more nuanced way. And yeah, it sounds like that could be a great resource for people
Mm,
generally. Yeah.
yep,
Cool. Okay. Thank you so much, Joshua. I really appreciate yeah, getting your point of view on this and yeah, just being brave, going out there, saying what you think. I know it's not easy and it is tiring, but yeah,
yeah,
more discussion, not less. That's what we're going for.
agree,
All right.
agree.
Thanks,
And thank you so
Joshua.
much. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.